You're in business to get nourished, right? You're not in business to get money. You're in business to get nourished.
Ooh, I like that.
And so, I mean, if you're not creating the work you want to create, you're not serving yourself in the work you're doing as much as you're serving your client, then you're going to feel deprived.
Welcome to the Wedding Biz with Andy Kushner, the show about the global wedding business and your backstage pass to the happily ever after world of professional dream makers.
I gave you my heart on a silver platter, 'cause you make my dreams come true. It won't crack, baby, it'll never shatter, no matter what we go through.
Hi, it's Andy Kushner. And I recently returned from a wonderful podcast conference called PodFest 18 in Orlando, where I had the pleasure of speaking and hanging with fellow podcasters. And it's incredible how the industry is exploding and the enormous amount of passionate people creating amazing content. I was so impressed. And yet there are still so many in the public who have not yet been turned on to the medium of podcasting. And so if you enjoy the Wedding Biz, please subscribe and share it with friends and colleagues so we can continue to build our community. And in the next few months, we will not only continue to release these in-depth conversations with icons of the wedding and events industry who educate and inspire, but we will also be providing additional content offerings and an opportunity for you to personally contribute to the show. So very excited about that. So today, I am really excited to bring you a fascinating interview and conversation with Sean Lowe of the Business of Being Creative. Sean is incredibly smart, wonderfully gifted, and just a supremely creative consultant who, as many know, is also just so passionate and caring. And he has this uncanny knack for not only helping wedding industry professionals build and transform their creative businesses, and by the way, at literally any level of expertise and experience, but to also make great strides toward that ever elusive state of reaching self-actualization. So get ready to experience Sean Lowe. Sean, you are the founder and president of the Business of Being Creative, a consulting firm focused on providing practical advice to those in the business of being creative. And for 6 years prior, you were the president of Preston Bailey Design, representing Preston in his business endeavors all around the world. And other clients I know I can mention, since you've talked about them in public, are the brilliant Vicente Wolf, Style Me Pretty, Marcy Blum, Michelle Rago, Sylvia Weinstock, Christian Oth, many others. You have helped numerous creatives set the foundation for further growth and development, taking them as far as they basically choose to go. And, you know, Sean, I read that you said, I have the ability to help artists build their businesses in a way that most honors the art that is behind them. And I just wonder if you can kind of summarize what you mean by that.
Oh, it's easy. It's what's between their ears instead of what's between their hands. And I think that for the most part, getting paid for what is created in their minds, no matter what kind of art an artist is working on, is the most challenging aspect of things, right? Because we're all so used to how beautiful is the thing, whether that's a design or whether that's a piece of music or a movie or a photograph. It's the thing that gets created in the end that we judge, but really it's the essence of making it come to be in the first place that's incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
So
I want to come back to that definitely in a minute, because that is the challenge. I mean, even in my own experience, the artistic part of me, that's always been an incredible challenge. So, but I'm curious how all this started for you. You're from New York, right? Mm-hmm. Raised and bred, I was going to say.
In the slums of Park Avenue.
The slums of Park Avenue?
Yeah.
You grew up in a nice way, huh?
I did. And I was always a student of business, and I was the typical type A, super driven student, and went on to college and law school. And
where'd you go?
I went to University of Pennsylvania for both college and law school.
Oh, wow.
And so, it was really, I love being a student. I'm a perpetual student. So I just love anything I can learn and get my hands on, I do. And I was always very, very interested in how business worked. And I was, it was much more of a challenge for me to actually be in that world, because my natural inclination is to get paid for that thing that you can't put your finger on.
Yeah.
And so the nuts and bolts of, let's say, somebody creating a thing, a product, a bottle of water and getting paid for that, was never really my strength, right? It was always the creativity and making something that didn't exist before that I always loved. And I was always astounded that it was very challenging growing up to figure that out. I grew up, my stepfather made wedding rings, and he literally ran a factory. And so for him, it was all the nuts and bolts of pricing and efficiencies and stuff like that. And I can value that, but it never really sang to me. It was always the place of just like, okay, but what's the idea worth?
But even before that, I mean, first of all, I'm curious, why did you get into law?
I love the way that lawyers think. I don't necessarily like lawyers, and as I think a lot of people have frustrations with lawyers, but the way lawyers think in the sense that they attack both sides of an issue and try to dissect it and think their way through things always appealed to me.
So what kind of lawyer were you thinking of being?
I actually never had an aspiration to be a lawyer. I had always had the aspiration to use law to go somewhere else.
Oh, I see.
But I definitely got interested. It was I graduated in 92. So she was definitely my mentor when I was a law student, was Elizabeth Warren. And so
I didn't know that. You mean she was your teacher?
She was my teacher. She was my teacher.
No idea.
She was the second professor I ever had. She taught me contracts, and then she taught bankruptcy, which is definitely her forte. And so I took everything she had to teach.
But why? What was it about her that you loved?
She's just a remarkable teacher.
She just stimulated your thinking. I mean,
challenge, and just her mannerisms and the way that she taught just spoke to me. And so from that, I just decided that I wanted to. She taught bankruptcy, and I thought I wanted to be a bankruptcy lawyer. And then, real estate. At the time when I graduated, real estate was coming back, and the interesting of being in real estate. So I practiced that for a couple of years, and then, but when you're a young lawyer, you're not really practicing anything, especially at a big firm in New York, which I was.
So what did you do after that? I mean, I read that you were an investment banker, a financial executive, small business. I'm curious about the whole trajectory here.
The whole trajectory is fun. So then I went, a friend of a friend actually knew someone on Wall Street at the time, was in asset-backed securities. I knew exactly nothing about it, but I was frustrated being a lawyer because it wasn't how I really love to think, right? Because I'm always of, well, let's try this and not let's think about the 15 things that could go wrong and what would happen if they do. And that's an important aspect of any kind of transaction, no matter what. But it wasn't what I really loved. And so I got bored and frustrated, and I wanted to reach out for something more. And then a friend of a friend said, hey, you should try asset-backed securities. And that's the mortgage days and before everything that wound up blowing up the world. But back then, that was really just the start of, creating bonds that are backed by, not just regular mortgages, but subprime mortgages and that whole thing. So I went to do that. I went to work for Prudential Securities in 1995.
And this is still out of Manhattan?
Yeah, in 1995.
So you're in the thick of it in your 20s.
I'm in the thick of it. In my late 20s, I definitely went to work on Wall Street and started it there. And that was I stayed there for 3 years, and it was a really trial by fire because my two principal bosses, 6 months after I started there, they left. They went to another firm, and the client we were working on, which went on to be my biggest client, who I then went to work for in Dallas in 1997, I was left with just me, and I didn't really know very much what was going on. And I think they really thought that when they left, they would take this client with them, and I just did everything I could to make that not happen. So it was a trial by fire and a lot of work, and taught me a lot. And I eventually went to work for them in Dallas in 97 and 98.
I didn't know you actually lived in Dallas.
Yeah, I lived in Dallas for a year.
But then didn't you come back to New York City?
I did in 98. I did. I left in 98, something called long-term capital happened, which really blew up the financial markets, like what happened in 2008. And I had to leave that company, and I just decided that I didn't want to be in finance anymore. The life just wasn't for me. It was headed in a place that I thought it was more predatory than it was kind of supportive. I originally got into it thinking, hey, we could create this market that would really help people who couldn't otherwise get a loan. And it turned into, a lot of financial instruments and a lot of people just creating instruments in order to make money.
So
right?
is this at the point when you then started this small business? Had something
Yep.
about catering?
Yeah,
Tell me
Then
about
of
that.
course, because
I
I
heard
was
that. I love that story.
Yeah, well, because I was took my type A-ness and realized that there's a lot of type A-ness downtown in Manhattan, and we started a partner who worked with me at the investment bank started a business that delivered dinners to people that work late, and so because we knew that wasn't very many good options then to get something to eat, and nobody was really taking advantage of the fact that the people who were ordering dinner didn't pay for it, right? So they had a budget every night.
Interesting. So they can get anything they want, and
they had every night they had $25 to spend, and nobody was taking advantage of.
Interesting.
And so we decided to start a business, and it was definitely the best way to make $1 million was to invest $3 million in a food business, which I didn't invest $3 million, but I'd lost everything.
Why do you think that? Like, what do you think happened?
Well, 9/11 happened, and that was a big reason.
Oh, I didn't realize it was right at that time.
It was right at that time.
Oh my God.
So we started in 99, and we had just finished really building out our kitchen at the summer of 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And then 9/11 happened, and the kitchen was two blocks away from the Trade Center.
But you know what I'm starting to get with you, with your story is what gives you this wonderful foundation with finances and mathematics and just thinking in terms of what's behind what you do as a consultant, bringing that aspect to it. So I like also that you started with a partner, your own business, and I understand why it didn't work out, but I imagine you must have learned a ton from that experience of being an entrepreneur yourself.
Oh, I made every mistake you could make. I think there's a huge difference for those that, have worked for businesses, right? Especially small to even medium-sized businesses. And it can be small businesses, but businesses where you didn't have to worry about your paycheck, right? And you didn't have to worry about getting paid. And then there's a difference between starting your own business where you're responsible and you're the person who has to look somebody in the face and say, I don't have the money to pay you, or I have to let you go because I can't pay you. And I think when you have that mindset, it becomes something other, right? I'm very grateful for having bigger firm experience and things like that, but also, learning the very hard lessons that I learned as owning my own business and doing that placed with employees in a different kind of business is also to be, that was never the thing that really spoke to me. Never really was it didn't really fuel a passion for you. It did. I wanted to make it go, but I think I wanted to make it go just to make it go, right? Not the idea of what I really love doing, which is, celebrating ideas and getting that done and moving on.
So is that what led to Preston? Is that what you did next?
Well, I wish I could say that's what led to Preston. Preston was much more fortuitous than that. So me being me, having the financial background that I had and all of that, Preston at the time, this was now 2002, because we made it for a year. We got a bunch of money to survive. And so at the end of 2002, beginning of 2003, the business was really winding down, and I tried to do whatever I could to save it, including getting into catering and spending all the money that the government gave me to try to do catering. But we were already so gone at that point, and there's a lot of amazing caterers, as I know, that are servicing in New York City, and I certainly wasn't going to, as a last ditch, get in there. And, so as my business was coming to an end in the spring of 2003, I tried to bring Preston in to help me get catering business. And of course, Preston doesn't do that, right? He's a designer, visual designer, but he brought Marcy with him, Marcy Blum. And Marcy came down, and Marcy has tremendous restaurant experience. And the long story short is that Marcy said, his business is going to go broke, but you could really use him.
What?
And at the time, because Marcy had been involved with restaurants that had got up and down, and she knew it, and she was right. And she's exactly right. And then I thought that, I could help. At the time, Preston was about $1.5 million in debt, which he said, it's very public. He is absolutely
he's talked about that. Yeah, I interviewed him, and he talked a lot about these struggles of his.
I'm not revealing anything that Preston hasn't already said in public. I never would. And so I thought that I could help him raise money and get himself out of debt, but I couldn't do that. He owed money for taxes and for vendors and stuff like that, and nobody wants to give you money for that. But along the way, I figured out that I could really help him run his business. And so...
But from what perspective? What is it that grabbed you? And again, he's talked about this a lot.
So I thought that the way he was getting paid made no sense, and how honoring what he did made no sense. And so a lot of things I thought I could really jump in there and just fix. And it was a trial by fire. And so I started working with Preston at the middle of September of 2003. And we fought like cats and dogs, because there's a lot of things that he did that I just was really, really against. And some of those things were like he would do a drop-off party for $5,000 and alongside a huge wedding for $300,000. And that made no sense to me. And so he had a warehouse full of stuff that took up not only storage rooms in New Jersey, but 2 floors in Manhattan. And I was, one of the very first things I did was back up a dumpster and threw it all away. So those are the kind of things that I started to do. And I think that what it was that I just had enough exposure to what he did with catering and things like that, but not enough to really say, hey, this is the way it works. And then along the way, what happened was I started to take what I knew in business, and also what I always loved was the idea of creativity and getting paid for it. And it started to really blossom. And fits and starts and things that nothing is ever perfect.
And I know that with Preston, which I know is also common knowledge about him that he talks about, is that if I remember correctly, although he was already, doing very well, he became better even later, but he was doing very well as a floral designer, that he really considered himself more in a sense like a florist, right? In terms of the way he priced. And I think you're the one who started the whole idea of talking to him about branding himself, and that he should get a fee as a designer and brand himself and recognize that. And the costs, whatever, pass along the cost of the flowers, doesn't matter, but it's charging this design fee. Wasn't that a radical change for him? And well, even for the industry, but can you say something about that?
Oh, absolutely. That's the part that, there's a lot of ways that came to be. But the backup before that is just, here it is. I'm starting to realize that what Preston called himself, like you said, what didn't make any sense. He wasn't a florist in the sense that he did things way bigger than just flowers. And he wasn't a planner because he didn't plan what happened inside the walls. That was for the Marcys of the world. But so what was he? And, he was a designer. He was a visual designer. And you weren't going to call him a visual designer because it was too broad. But, so literally we just said, well, let's call me an event designer, right? And that at that time, in 2003, 2004, nobody did that, right?
Yeah, so he must have pushed back, I would think.
No, he embraced it because it was a better description of who he was. Right?
Okay.
He pushed back on when I decided to change the business model. That's when he pushed back. And the business model came to be because he had written a book before I ever showed up, and he had the second book on his way. He was noticed internationally, and he was noticed by people from the Middle East, and they wanted him to come to do their weddings, right? And which were very elaborate, multi-million-dollar affairs, and he had no idea how to do it because they said you can come to the Middle East, Preston, but you can't bring a staff. You can only bring 10 people, right? And this time it still is very restrictive. But then, of course, Saudi Arabia was very restrictive, and so he said, I don't know how to do that, and I was like, oh, I do, and we had talked about doing things like this. And so that's how it really kind of blossomed into the idea of getting paid just to create, right? Getting paid just for the idea, and getting paid with the rest of it, understood that he's going to supervise that, but not get paid for what he never should get paid for, which is the thing, right? He should get paid to create what the thing is going to be, and then supervise its production.
The vision, right? And execute the vision.
And then supervise its production. And let someone else get paid for actually producing the thing. Supervise the production, but the actual cost of bringing thing there and making that happen should be somebody else's responsibility.
Well, I had a similar issue. I mean, as you know, I've worked with you for a very long time. It was Marcy Blum and Sylvia Weinstock who recommended you. And then as like anyone else, I'm scared to invest in a consultant. So I called Preston, and Preston just said, absolutely, immediately hire him. I wouldn't be who I am without you. Yeah. And what I remember, even speaking with him during the interview, and is that that this is really the heart of it, right? For all of us, quote unquote, creatives, and here we are at Engage, where this is a whole conference full of creative people, and to be able to figure out how to price our services and balance that or mix that business aspect with the creative aspect. I know that in my own situation with you, with my music business, It's interesting. You had said to me, because I was just, pitching bands and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't want to make this all about me, but in terms of the concept, and you were the one that said, no, wait, this is you. The business
Mm-hmm.
is you. It's not those bands. And why? Don't even talk about those bands. Talk about this experience you're creating. And it took me months to understand this.
Yeah.
And is this something that, so you finished with Preston and you're now consulting, you have your own business. And is this typical what you run into with people?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Can you say more about that? Why do you think that is? What do you think? What is the heart of the struggle?
It's many layers, right? It's what we all face is we're creating, and the idea that we're getting paid to create something that's so personal and dear, right, is very raw. And I think putting yourself out there to get paid for that rawness
it's a very vulnerable
is a very
state.
vulnerable place to be.
Yeah.
And so we hide. And I think that it's only a human nature to want to hide, right? And say that we'll do something other than maybe what we love to do. So for someone, we're sitting here in beautiful Cancun, Mexico, that maybe there's somebody that does just only weddings in Washington, right? That's all they love to do is to do weddings in Washington, but it's too scary just to do weddings in Washington. And not only just do weddings in Washington, but maybe just do, weddings less than 100 people in ballrooms in Washington, right? That's a very scary place to be because somebody won't hire you because they're not doing a wedding in Washington for 100 people in a ballroom, but because they are doing a wedding in Washington for 100 people with a ballroom and they don't want to hire you. Therefore, you say, well, I'll do a wedding for 200 people in a ballroom. And then you say, well, I'll do a wedding outside of Washington. And then I'll do a wedding in destination, don't you know? And don't you think, I'll say yes. And you become addicted to yes, right? Because it helps you get through the pain of getting rejected for the very thing that you do.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And then months, years, and decades go by, and all of a sudden the very thing that you care most about, which is doing weddings in a ballroom for 100 people in Washington, gets covered over by all the other stuff you're doing. And the thing you most care about, the thing you most want to get paid for, you don't get paid for. And usually when that frustration sets in, that they can't do the wedding in Washington for 100 people in a ballroom, is when they call me.
Well, and regarding pricing, to get into that now, which is such a big deal. I read, I believe you posted this in your blog, your website, April 2017. It was kind of recent. You said the power of creativity is what you, the artist, the creative business owner, says it is. If you are willing to define creativity based on relative demand for your art, you are literally turning over the decision of what you are worth to someone else. Why, oh, why would you ever do that if you did not have to? Right? Yeah. That's the heart. Can you say more about that? That's really the heart of it,
that's
isn't it?
That's one of my favorites. That's the heart of it, right? Because if there's a market for you as an artist, right? Sure, it's what somebody would pay for it. But at the end of the day, if you need to get a certain amount of money to feel good about the creation you created, that has to come from you, right? That has to come from what you need and to live the life you want to live. And we all have different lives that we want to have for ourselves, right? Some people enjoy, the mega rich lifestyle, and other people are very comfortable on much less, living the exact life they want to live, not, some other version of a life. But I'm talking specifically that. And so if you happen to be an artist, you have to get that much money in order to do that life, right? And so that's what I'm talking about is that need, that desire to create has to be limited to who I want to create for, meaning how much do you want to create? And then, what you need in order to do that work, right? It's an ideal, of course, right? And maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't. But at the end of the day, that's what you need.
But can I just stop for a second and ask you, so you're saying in terms of what you need. So again, we're separating this from trying to value what is the art or the thing that I'm doing, but rather what is it I need, in order to make a comfortable living doing this and free myself to do what I do best. It kind of comes from that perspective.
Yep, from the top down.
Which is so hard for people. That was hard for me.
Yeah.
That's really tough.
Yeah, it is really hard.
But why not, right? I mean, what else?
What else is there? It's hard, but that doesn't take away the idea that that's the answer, right? And the idea, because if you're getting what you need to create for who you're creating for, then everybody wins, right? So it's when somebody says to you, well, you think you're worth 10, but I only think you're worth 8. And you have to then look at them and say, okay, you're right. That's just going to eat at you. all the time, right?
Yeah,
So-
and I know that you generally don't believe in quote unquote discounting and things like that.
No.
But to get that strength, like I think you've written about this and talked about it a lot, and even with me too. You know, in times when I have when it's been difficult, or let's say there's economic issues, right? Even you know, with the economy, and we feel like, okay, we're not as busy. Let's just say whatever, make it up in March. You know, we don't have a lot going on. We need the cash flow, and here comes a client saying, "Well, I'll give you 80% of that number." Now, for a lot of people, it's very tempting to say, yes, okay, right? Because you're thinking, I'm slow in March. I have the time. I need the cash flow. How do you feel about that?
I hate it.
Okay. And why?
Well, because if it's all dictated, I mean, it gets too intellectual and esoteric, and I'm sorry, but I have to go here. So artists aren't factories, right? And so, or they're not even hotels. So hotels have hotel rooms, and you have to sleep in those beds. And if a guest doesn't sleep in a bed, the hotel doesn't get money.
Right.
And so if I can get 80 cents on the dollar, right, for someone to sleep in the hotel when it's not that busy, I have to take it, right? Because I have to use the asset. Otherwise, we won't make the money we need to make.
Okay.
But an artist isn't that way. An artist is getting paid to be creative and to do amazing work and to honor the journey up the mountain, if you will. And that journey up the mountain looks the same every single time. Sometimes it'll be shorter, sometimes it'll be longer, but the journey up the mountain is the same. And you get paid to take that journey, right? And so you only want to take a certain amount of journeys a year. You only want to do it in a particular way. And either you do your best or you don't. And so if someone's going to treat you like you're a hotel and that you happen to have the time, it takes away from the idea that you're an artist and you create at the level you want to create.
Yeah.
And that doing that one other piece of business because you happen to be slow or you happen to not be there, but not with intention, right? That this is when you want to work. Maybe you're slow because you need the rest. Maybe you're slow because, you planned to be slow, right?
So not to interrupt you, but to interrupt you. So maybe there's a certain amount of a leap of faith, right? Yeah. I mean, I guess that is what it is that, look, I feel like I need the money. I'm really scared, but I don't want to put it out there.
Right.
Then I'm going to take that. Right. And to me, it's not even just that word may get around, which often in this industry it does among brides and all. They'll all talk. I've had that before when I've made that mistake and it comes back to haunt me. It's like, well, you gave the goldsmiths, blah, blah, blah. It does take this leap of faith, but it's really hard to talk about. It leaves room, like in a sense you're about to say, for something better to happen.
Yeah.
And it's hard to take that, what feels like a risk.
Well, and that's the point is that, you didn't start to go into creative business because you wanted a job, right? You went in to be an artist because you wanted to create for a living.
Yeah.
And you wanted to, I think it's also, the faith has to come from the idea that you're on the planet and you've chosen this business for yourself because your job is to change the world. Right, your job isn't to do something that someone else tells you to do, or something like whatever other typical career would be. Right, your job is to change the world. Your job is to create great art that transforms the client, right, in some way. It makes them feel something they didn't otherwise feel.
Yeah,
and if you can own that as a responsibility for yourself, a true responsibility for yourself, then cheapening your ability to do that, making it impossible for you to do your best or to or to cast yourself in a light where there's no way you're going to be seen as a transformative element in their lives other than maybe a functionary or someone that did a good job for somebody, right? Then you just take away the very essence of why you're in the business to begin with, right? So...
Well, yeah. And, I remember kind of earlier in my days when I used to do stuff like this, I'll add to that too. I did not feel good about my art when I had discounted it like that. It felt terrible.
No. Yeah.
And I do think there's definitely this synchronicity, serendipity. I remember one situation that you were very well aware of. I was approaching October some years ago, which, we work worldwide, but locally, the local market, the bread and butter, that's a very busy wedding month. And I remember with my top act, having a very key weekend open. Yeah. And I was freaking out.
Right.
I was flipping out. And I think we even had a situation where there was an offer for less money. And I was like, no, I didn't do it. So what happens? I think it was literally 6-7 weeks before that weekend. that's when I got this call for this enormous multi-day corporate job in Singapore, which was, in a sense, a career changer. Lots of money and also the experience, right? All of that. And I remember thinking, if I had taken that wedding at less money, I wouldn't have been able to take this.
Right.
And Preston had a story too. When I interviewed him, we talked about this too, same kind of thing. And I've had actually several people I've interviewed talked about these kinds of situations, you know.
Yeah.
And that's a real tough one. What about also when you're dealing with your clients? You seem to, in some ways, fill the role of a therapist.
There's definitely part of, well, I'm definitely not trained as a therapist, and I would never hold myself out as a therapist, but there's a lot of therapeutic elements to it, having done more than enough in my life. And I think that the therapeutic part about it is appreciating, you know, that it is emotional, it is personal, it is, you know, a reflection on what you most care about, right? Because it's not like, hi, buy my toothpaste, and maybe if I marketed my toothpaste well, you'll buy it, right? And it looks a whole lot like every other toothpaste.
Yeah.
No, this is what you most care about in the world, what you most care about putting out to say, hey, wait a second, this will change you.
Yeah.
And so that becomes so personal, right? It
Yeah.
becomes so much of a reflection of who you are. And so there's always an element of stripping away the noise that we use to protect ourselves, and that's very much about therapy, right?
Well,
So,
these character issues that we all have, you know, that some of us are aware of, some are maybe slightly, but it's like, and you do have a very intuitive sense about, as you get to know people. I know my experience with you, getting to know where those, I don't know what to call them, pain points, let's say with me are, and to deal with that. And I know, you know, some other clients of yours have different issues. And so, it seems like that, like, again, you're not literally being a therapist, but you're dealing with the ultimate vulnerability.
Definitely. And look, there's nothing more vulnerable, having done it myself for so many years, that of running your own business. It challenges you with every bit of emotion you can have. And then add on the idea that you're getting paid to create for a living.
Yeah.
You're not just selling somebody, here, do you want this toothpaste or not? You're like, this toothpaste doesn't exist yet. Let's make it together.
Right.
And here, let me show you how to make it. And then pay me for the idea of what it's going to be before it ever exists. That's the idea of complete vulnerability. And that's the place where we all get trapped. We all have our different ways of covering for that.
Well,
right?
and when you say it's a lot of self-sabotage in a way.
Tons.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is something you run into pretty often, huh?
I do. I run to a lot of, you know, myself included, right? If it wasn't, I couldn't see it if it wasn't in the mirror. So it's a lot of places where it's that we all get bit, right? We get bit by whatever it is that drives us to be great in the first place, right?
Yeah. You know, this also makes me think, I have another quote of yours. You said, while you dream about the art you create, I dream about the structure of how you're going to best deliver that art, which includes everything we've just talked about so far, right? Taking into consideration people's own character issues, what keeps them from being able to go for it and own it, right? And go for it. But if you could also say more about that again, I want to say this again, while you dream about the art you create, I dream, Sean, I dream about the structure of how you're going to best deliver that art.
Yeah. So think about art as a show, right? And so some shows belong in a football stadium, others belong in a little coffee shop, right? And how it then comes to exist, whether it's in the coffee shop or the stadium, is incredibly important. So I'm dreaming about, where does the art belong, right? And then how do you get there? How to work with you to determine that path up the mountain. So that's the best visual I can have, is that the work that every artist does is to take a client up a mountain, right? But you think about that in terms of not just a hill, like a day hike, but think about it in terms of climbing Mount Everest, right? Which is a multi-day, multi-week, multi-month kind of endeavor. And going from, let's call it the bottom to the first stop is maybe not so hard. From the first to the second stop, a little harder. From the second to third stop, almost impossible. From the third to the fourth stop, barely can breathe. In fact, probably can't breathe on your own. And from the fourth to the summit is next to impossible, right? So, what does that look like for you, right? Because that's the same for every single artist.
Yeah.
And how does that work? Because there's not an option for a client to decide how to go up the mountain. That's not their job. It's your job. And so working with people to be convicted in how that works and how that goes and how to lay out that idea, so that not just a client comes along begrudgingly, but willingly Just like as if you were going to go, you're not going to, begrudgingly climb Mount Everest.
That's
you're
right.
going to willingly climb Mount Everest.
Oh, I know from my own experience. Absolutely.
Yeah, you have to want to.
Yeah.
Right. And so how do you do that and how do you shape it? So I am constantly thinking about new and different ways to express that because it's so personal and it's also so laced with the idea of wanting to be understood and wanting to do shortcuts that would make you understood. So I am forever saying, well, why are you describing what you do this way, right? Because it's not allowing you to lay out the path that you're going to take, right? And so I'm always thinking about what that is and poking holes in it. And for me, there are no sacred cows in creative business, not at all.
How do you feel also tying into all of this is branding? Again, that was the heart of my issue in the beginning was how I viewed myself. And you helped clarify that. And essentially for Preston too, although you did the structure, it was that too. I'm never the person that's going to bring someone to your door. There's brilliant marketers out there that are brilliant at social media and marketing and bringing it there. But at the end of the day, the message is the same. And it's a Seth Godin line. It's like people like us do things like this, right? And if you can't figure out how to have empathy for your client to reach in and say, not that you have to be your client ever, right? In fact, you don't, but you have to understand what they most desire, the transformation they most seek, and relate to the idea that you can deliver that for them, right? And when you do that, then you're able to be in tune with how you're going to do that for them, what your business is going to deliver to give them the very thing they most seek from you, right? People like us do things like this. And in that way, it's about branding, right? So stripping away all the noise of that would not otherwise be interesting to people like us, right? And in that way, you find your smallest niche ever, right? That's how you find the real value in doing ballroom weddings for less than 100 people in Washington. And that's how you discover that there's more than enough people to support you doing those kind of events or that kind of work, right? Also you talk a great deal about connection, creating connection with other people.
Definitely.
Everything. I mean, from your team to, your clients in particular. Can you say more about connection? Because it seems like today, in business today, that is becoming even more, it's always been important, but even more important than ever is connection, personally connecting.
Oh, I think that the answer is that, it's rooted in the same of people like us do things like this. It's a great kind of transition to that because it's that you have to have an appreciation for people do business with people. And then just for me, the trajectory of the way the world is today, and you would never think it possible 10 years ago to really evaluate the world based on how much somebody likes you or not, right? And yet we live in a world today where that's all that matters. It's not just do you like me, but how much do you like me? The simple Facebook button of like, love, happy, sad, how do you feel about me is deeply in our culture, swipe left, swipe right. And so that meaning of who you are as a person, which is driven by what you most desire to create as an artist, right? Those two things go hand in hand, to me, is the basis of connection, right? You have to meet there, right? Both vendor and client alike and employees alike, you have to meet with that purpose, right? And that niche and that desire. And so the basis of the relationship to me is that essence of who you actually are and what you actually care about. And that's different for everybody, right? And clearly in the wedding world, there's tons. And so you meet at that level. And I think that at the end of the day is what we're all going to get judged on, right? Because I think, not to be kind of woo about it, but everything else is already out there, right? The type of music you play, the quality of your flowers, the beauty of your cake, how well you're known, how well you work, what people think about you and your evaluations and all of that stuff. That's all out there, right? Everybody can see that, right? But the idea of who you are, the essence of who you are, and that essence of who you are translated into your business, and that essence in your business is the foundation of connection, right?
And I believe that this also is the foundation to then tie into creating an experience for people.
Sure.
It's interesting. Just now I'm realizing, I'm thinking, also this whole thing about creating an experience. However, it starts with the connection. Whether it's, for me in performing, creating a connection with that crowd it's the first step to being able to take them on this journey, create this experience. And for planners, designers, stationery, all of it, cake designers, it's interesting. One of the threads that ties all these icons I'm interviewing in this show, The Wedding Biz, is that I'm finding that every one of them, there's one single common thread, which is the way that they connect with their clients. And then I find that the clients, it's not just the night, talking about weddings, the night of the wedding that is the experience. It's the process along the way of working with the designer, the planner, the stationery, the cake designer, all of that becomes an experience in of itself because of that tie into connecting with them.
Yeah. And that's the basis of everything I do, right? So the inevitable end is inevitable if the journey is profound, right?
What about also, I know that for me, a big struggle was, and sometimes is, not feeling the gratitude enough, constantly the next thing. It's the next thing. It's the next thing. Okay, got it. Next, got it. Next. And, this perpetual state of being somewhat frustrated or maybe even in some cases unhappy. And, that's something I know you've talked to me a lot about too, right?
Yeah. I think you're in business to get nourished, right? You're not in business to get money. You're in business to get nourished.
Ooh, I like that.
And so, if you're not creating the work you want to create, you're not serving yourself in the work you're doing as much as you're serving your client, then you're going to feel deprived, right? And there's no satisfaction then. And then you're always going to be out saying, I have to fill up that deprivation by maybe more work or more money or more something. But that deprivation is never going away right? Because you're not nourished by the very thing you most want to express. Right?
Yeah.
It's only like, if you want to sing at the top of your lungs, but you're only able to sing softly, it doesn't work. Right? You can sing softly, and I guess it feeds you a little bit because you want to sing in the first place. But if you don't get to sing at the top of your lungs, what's the point, right?
So do you have any suggestions for people in this business on how they can take that pause and do that?
Yeah, one thing that matters, right? Find the one thing that matters because there's always one thing, right? And whenever in doubt, focus on that one thing, right? Whatever is really important to you, whatever really speaks to you, and go find the place where you don't see it, right? And then make it positive.
Yeah. It's interesting the way I started off my morning today. I'm here at the conference. It hasn't quite started. And I do this, morning transcendental meditation, which has been really wonderful. And then at the end of it, I thought to myself, I want to further kind of root myself here before I get out into the throngs of people. And I kind of did this little exercise I sometimes do about, what am I grateful for connected to being here?
Yeah.
In terms of my team, what they're doing to allow me to be here, what it is I've accomplished thus far to be in this position to be here, the support, the friends here, the friends I'm going to make.
Right.
It was a nice way to start.
It's a great intention. I love hearing that.
Yeah. So what are some of the different ways in which you work with clients? I know there's retainer clients, mentoring sessions. I want to hear about the BBC Collective. There's only two?
Well, there's the collective too. And I think that's the whole other thing. That's working with clients, but in a different way. So the way I usually work with clients is there's some people just like to hear, me take a deep dive into their company and talk maybe, for some people it's once every month or a couple of weeks and then come back. And so that's mentoring, right? And the idea that I'm just going to give you what I think about your business. And some people it's twice a year and some people it's twice a month. And that's not as much of a commitment as talking to me every single week like we have, right? And do. And that's what I call my retainer business, which is really, let's just dissect your business. And typically that takes, I only work in 4-month increments in the first two terms. So most of people that work with me on a retainer basis are with me for, at least 8 months, most are for a year, a little bit, right? Just because it takes that long to dissect everything that we're going to do and then decide what we're going to do. A great example, and I've used it many times, is that with retainer clients, what the first move is to, before we decide where we're going to put the water, we have to clean out all the gunk in the pipes, right? And see how the water is flowing, right? So because before you figure out where to put the water, what the pressure of the water should be, the pipe has to be what it's supposed to be. And then once you do that, then you change where the water flows and how it flows. And so doing that work, and then once you've set it in place, once it's flowing the way you want to, where you want it to, getting used to it so that you don't add the gunk back into the pipes, that's the next period, right? So that's the work I do on a weekly basis with clients. And then The collective is something I'm really passionate about. There's about 25 professionals now in the event space that it's my take on a mastermind group. But rather than just talk every week, what we do is that come up with a topic. I write on that topic, like my blog post, just a little more intense. In fact, what I have been doing, which I think has worked well for everybody, is that I write a very specific post for the collective, and then I edit it and generalize it, and that's the post that people see in public, right? And then we have a conference call that I record on that post. So usually I post, let's call it on a Tuesday. We have a conference call on Thursday, and then we discuss it for about an hour and a half of what on that topic and thoughts on that topic and how to help and what to do. And then I embed that call into the post. So it's really a way for somebody to listen to the dialogue that happened based on what I wrote and what the group asked me to write about in that dialogue. And I also have guest lecturers come in and do the same thing, paid to do the exact same thing, on what is their forte. And my intention with it is that while the work I do with individual clients, I'll never stop doing, and it does really speak to me and will always speak to me. We're all better together, right? And so as we put out new and different ideas, conceptualize new and different ways to be in the business, a group together, especially, my intention is that I really do want the collective to grow to be about 60 or 70, maybe 80 professionals. That way I can do more than one call a week. I can have more people come in and speak to the different issues we face. And we can have even more of an impact on the industry. And it really is the event industry, but let's call it 85% of it is the wedding industry. Yeah. And so my intention with the collective is to do it on a perpetual basis where we're always kind of discussing doing different topics. We come in back and forth, and we can go everything from presentation skills and how a couple of members have literally done virtual reality as a presentation to different pricing methods, to understanding how different creative industries work, because I'm really versed in interior design and other creative industries through what I do, trying to really take the event business and bring it out of the place where it is, right? Doing the same work, like clearing out language that doesn't make any sense. Things like, packages and
yeah, I know that's a bad word.
It's a bad word for me.
I agree now.
Packages are no good.
Yeah.
And why that is, and come up with new ways to maybe differentiate with a client, like having a design statement. And what does that look like? Right? Doesn't exist today, and most people don't have a design statement, right? But every design doesn't mean visual. Design means creative, right? And so a musician can have a design statement just as much as a caterer, just as much as a florist, right? So
yeah, I also see added benefit. I love the one-on-one. I think that's awesome. And then also supplementing with this group kind of a situation where you make the connection with each other, and you're hearing you're not the only one.
That's
and
right.
Sharing ideas. That's hugely valuable, because we're so, I don't know, in a sense, we're so alone in a way. Definitely. In our work. It's why we come to these conferences too. So, what is the best way for people to learn more about you and to reach you?
Well, you can always check out my blog, which is thebusinessofbeingcreative.com. If you want to learn about the collective, it's the bbccollective.com.
Okay. Yep.
And you can always email me, Sean, SEAN, at thebusinessofbeingcreative.
Wonderful. Well, Sean, I've been looking forward to this a long time. I love working with you. You've helped me to change my life with my career awesome. And do my art. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
This has been The Wedding Biz with Andy Kushner. You can find us at theweddingbiz.com and on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Wedding Biz Show.
I gave you my heart.
If you want to support the show, we'd be grateful if you shared it with colleagues, friends, and family. We'd also appreciate your review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.
It'll never shatter, no matter what we go through. I gave